I've been thinking recently about the new Star Trek series Picard. As is Star Trek tradition, the first season was a bit of a mixed bag. But personally, more landed for me than didn't, and one of the things that landed really well was costumes. One specific costume really caught my eye.
7 of 9?
You owe me a ship, Picard.
And it's not just because it's a great costume in its own right, but because of what it's not. It is not that catsuit. Hi friends, welcome to the first ever costume codex on Star Trek. See, Star Trek lets me talk about some things that Buffy doesn't. So, for this one, we're going to be looking at what constitutes bad costuming. But to talk about bad costuming, I should first define my terms of what is good costuming. Good costuming is not about the clothes looking bad or good, it's about how they serve the story. And I'm going to borrow Lonnie Diane Rich of Chipperish Media's definition of story here as a series of events with meaning. And importantly, a series of events that happen to people in a place. So that's very basic. And costumes can serve story in 3 different ways. They illustrate something for the audience about the character, about who they are, the themes or emotions, or the world building. Not every costume serves all 3 of these story needs, and they'll serve them in different combinations. Buffy, for example, is heavy on character and theme. Star Trek tends to put more emphasis on world building. An example of really good costuming from Buffy is the Gentlemen. Their costumes show them as a group, and we see that they value conformity and a certain kind of masculinity. Their unity serves the episode theme of communication, they serve the season theme of individual versus institution, and they serve the overall show theme of empowerment and growth. A really good Star Trek example would be the Cardassians. Their look combines aesthetic elements from the history of fascism with elements taken from snakes and reptiles. It creates a definitive look that can be repeated through elements of costume as well as architecture and other elements. And it serves the theme of authoritarianism that the Cardassians are used to explore in this world. And it adds to the arc of several characters. So good costuming serves at least one point on our story triangle here. When costume serves none at all, or doesn't serve them very well, we'll call that indifferent costuming. Bad costuming is when the clothes actively work against or undermine any of the 3 points on our story triangle. And here is where we come back to 7 of 9 and that terrible, no good, awful corset and catsuit. So let's look at this thing. First incarnation is the worst. It redefines the words skin tight. She's practically vacuum sealed in. Beneath the catsuit, she's wearing an incredibly restrictive corset to push up her bust into an impossible angle and shape. And the ribs of the corset act to direct your eye, just in case you didn't know where you were supposed to look. It's the worst. It's bad. It's Jessica Rabbit crossed with Marilyn Monroe, crossed with Barbie on Star Trek. There is, of course, a tradition of sexy costuming, and it's not inherently bad. Personally, I kinda love Jessica Rabbit, and some of Marilyn Monroe's films are my favorites. But the question of good costuming, again, we return to, does it serve the story? So, does this catsuit serve the story? As I said, Star Trek puts world building first, so let's look to world building. Does this build the world? Not really. Seven is a human who was freed from the Borg collective. She isn't part of Starfleet, so her not wearing a uniform could be considered part of the world building. But why is it this outfit? There is some flimsy technobabble given about it being a healing garment of some kind, but we never see anybody else heal in this kind of incredibly skin-tight corset. So that's a no on world building. Voyager doesn't really have larger themes of its own. It's too episodic for that. The wider Star Trek themes are exploration, humanism, striving to be more than we are. And if this costume serves those in any way at all, it is in a sort of metatextual way. Does the skin-tight bodysuit serve Seven's character? Well, to answer that, we have to look at who is 7 of 9. As I said, she is a human who was de-assimilated from the Borg. She was originally assimilated as a child and was removed from the collective against her will. Her character's journey is about rediscovering her humanity, and when the story allows it, overcoming the trauma of her assimilation. 7 is very direct and utilitarian in always pursuing perfection, and in some ways she is also kind of naive and innocent. She's on a similar journey to the character Anya on Buffy, but in Anya's case, she uses sex and relationships as part of her way to explore her humanity. 7 doesn't really do that, at least not on Voyager. There are a couple of episodes where she explores the romantic side of her nature a little, but in those cases she tends to take off the catsuit and wear something with a little more traditional femininity to it. So does the catsuit suit her character? Well, no. This isn't efficient or utilitarian. It doesn't really look it either. It's awkward and uncomfortable, and it's aggressively sexualizing her in a way that is not for her character, but for the audience. And this is when we look at a very different ethic of costume design. Scopophilia, literally, pleasure in looking. Visual media has always been somewhat scopophilic. Humans, for the most part, enjoy looking at attractive humans. And it's also traditionally part of clothing. People like looking at attractive humans in pretty clothes. And we also use clothes as a signal for sexuality or to indicate when we wish to be looked at. Okay, I'm going to be totally frank here. I'm a sex-positive feminist. I think expressing your own sexuality on your own terms is awesome and one of the great parts of being human. The key there is on your own terms. If someone wore this outfit to a drag show or a burlesque event, I would think it was awesome. Because those are spaces where people expressly choose how sexually they wish to express, how they wish others to see them. That isn't the context here. In Seven's case, the audience is being invited to look at a character's body and an actor's body, not on the character's terms or for any character purpose, but solely for the gratification of the presumably male audience, and occasionally for male characters as proxies for the audience. This is a kind of scopophilia we call the male gaze. Film theorist Laura Mulvey coined the term male gaze in her 1975 essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. Key to the male gaze is that a woman is reduced to her image, her body to an object. She is coded for visual and erotic impact, for a sort of looked-atness. Power dynamics are part of this as well. It matters that 7 did not choose this outfit. The Doctor chose it for her. Thankfully, it must be said that in 7's case, the male gaziness is really just in the costumes. The directors didn't frame her differently than the other characters. Unlike T'Pol in the next Star Trek series, Enterprise. You know, I'm not even going to show you examples of that. It's incredibly uncomfortable to watch and sort of makes Barbarella or even Austin Powers feel subtle. But my thesis here was that bad costuming is bad because it works against the story. So where does the male gaze come in with that? When you objectify a character, they become a thing to look at, not a person to connect with. It interferes and undermines the connection between them and the audience. It is a credit to some solid writing, and above all, the phenomenal acting of Jerry Ryan, the actor who plays 7, that 7 overcomes all of this and actually becomes a character that we do empathize with, that we love, and that people really wanted to see come back. But she should not have had to work against her costume to do this. It should have worked with her. While I was writing this essay, a friend asked me, so where is the line? You know, the line between finding a character sexy and the male gaze. Is it only about it being a woman who's being looked at by a man? And I would say definitely not. We've recently seen some attempts to even the playing field by framing male bodies in a similar way to that which the male gaze framed female bodies. But I don't really think that's the way forward. It's not great to be objectifying anybody, unless of course it serves the story. I don't think there is a clear line here, more of a spectrum, as with most things. I think the question we need to ask ourselves is the sexiness coming from the character, the person that the actors and the filmmakers are creating for us? Or are we seeing a person that we find attractive or visually appealing? Or are we seeing a body and then remembering afterwards that that is a person inside? I think that's definitely true in life, and also in film and TV as well. But of course, it all depends on whether the sexiness serves the story. That's the thing. It always comes back to story. What serves the story? This costume isn't bad because it's sexy, or because it's uncomfortable for the actor. And it's bad whether or not we like how it looks. It's bad because it works against the character in a way that doesn't serve the story. This costume, on the other hand, works with the character. It's simple, utilitarian, and well worn. The leather makes for a tough exterior, while the knitwear beneath suggests a softness. All of that totally fits the themes of the show, and it fits within the world that's being built. And in its own way, on Seven's own terms, it's kind of sexy.